Thank you so much to all of you coming out tonight. I know there have been a convergence of events that make it hard. We have an important debate happening. We have a rainstorm occurring. I think there was an Astros win recently. Was that today? So thank you all for coming. Exactly. My name is Sarah Cook. I am the co-president of the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association. I'm going to be very brief right now and focus on process. We want to offer members of the audience every opportunity to ask questions of the mayor, whom we want to thank for being here and devoting so much time to us tonight. Thank you for coming, Mayor. And what we're going to do first is have each leader of a neighborhood association that has pulled this together make a quick introductory statement. Then we are going to take audience questions. If there are questions that the leaders know have been important or submitted before time that we didn't get to, we may reserve some time at the end to ask those. Then the mayor will close us out with some closing remarks. I know that we got a little jammed up in the sign-in area. If you choose to, we'll be passing around the sign-in clipboards. Please feel free to sign in. You may not have gotten a name tag. If you choose to get one, you're welcome to do so. But most important, at the back we have some comment cards. If you don't choose to ask your question tonight in front of folks, please fill out one of those cards. We'll be collecting them at the end. And we just want to make sure that we're able to collect everybody's comments and submit those to both the mayor, some of the planning staff, and also Councilmember Tovo, who I'd like to recognize, who's here visiting with us in the back. So with that being said, let's begin. I would like to welcome a neighborhood association leader to come up, represent the neighborhoods, and we'll get started. Thanks, y'all.
Hello, everybody. My name's Chesney Floyd. I am the president of the Heritage Neighborhood Association, small neighborhood between 29th and 38th and Guadalupe and Lamar. I just wanted to thank you, all our neighbors, for being here tonight, and Mayor Adler, thank you for being here. We're talking about a land development code. It's a 1,358-page document, I believe, and it's going to be a lot to fit into 2 minutes, so I wanted to focus very briefly on something that can get lost in discussions of zoning and parcel types and density numbers, which is the qualitative dimension of what our city, Austin, is and how it's defined. As anybody who's looked at the maps currently knows, this current iteration of the Land Development Code uses transition zones along corridors to create more density in the city. And that seems potentially like a good strategy, but I think we also have to consider that for that strategy to make sense and to keep our central neighborhood cores more or less intact, the R2 zone, which is going to be replacing SF3 for most of us, is very important how that zone will be impacted by the code. So because Heritage is so close to the university, we're extremely vulnerable to redevelopment for student rental. A very important issue to us was the change from 6 unrelated adults on a site to 4 in 2014 and approved again in 2016. And one of the things we're most concerned about is that despite no apparent direction from the council, the current code now calls for 6 unrelated adult maximum per unit on a parcel. That means that in a duplex use, which now only requires 5,000 feet of lot area, we can have 12 bedrooms on a parcel. For us in Heritage, that amounts to a tripling of the density on the internal lots in the neighborhood. And so an issue we see potentially with that is that it could undermine the effectiveness of transition zones. All of our neighbors, both Friends of Heritage and the Neighborhood Association, support creating more affordable density along corridors in our neighborhood. What we don't want to see are developers choosing instead to put 10, 11, or 12 bedroom duplexes onto parcels, which are also allowed in the transition zones, because the houses in the core of the neighborhood are easier to purchase and the land is easier to buy. So I guess if I had one high level issue I want to make sure that we discuss tonight with the mayor, it would be, I want to understand better how this occupancy limit was settled on And if we could have a clear statement about the importance of retaining what Imagine Austin calls our livable, stable communities. And hopefully we can all get on the same page about preserving those so that if we use the transition zone to add density, it will actually be effective. Thank you.
Let's see here. Can you hear me through the microphone? Thank you. I'm Barbara Davis. I'm co-president of North University Neighborhood Association. That's NUNA. We are south of Hyde Park, starting around 38th and going to 29th and expanding from Guadalupe to Duval. We have different a lot of diversity in our neighborhood. We have Aldridge Place, which after a number of years has been designated as historical. We have the Grooms Edition, which has wonderful houses that are well preserved, as well as student housing and seminary housing. We're bounded by 2 seminaries, Episcopal and Presbyterian Seminary, to conceptualize our neighborhood for you, sir. One of the things that has been the emphasis, of course, is we are a vibrant and growing city. I understand that 150 or so people are moving into Austin daily. The implication of density being centered in the core, which is where we all live, that's why we're all here, sir. We have a lot of energy, is, you may have noticed that. Our concern about that particular issue is that not all of the new neighbors, 150 new neighbors who are moving in each day, are millennials, young people. As many, as I understand the numerology, as many are persons who are older and persons who work in a variety of trades and professions, not people all who will work downtown and wish to live in the core of the city. So as I understand also, your emphasis in density for you and your staff is centering the increase in density in the core of the city. And I believe that that is a very short-sighted approach, sir, and because many people don't want to live in the core of the city, and people who work in jobs and trades that don't make as much money, even with your affordable housing emphasis, may have a real trouble dealing with the price of housing in the core of the city. And so what are your plans for expanding this density increase with this large document outside of the core of the city specifically? And when do you expect them to be affected? Because if they are not affected in an explicit, planned way within this first document, I am very concerned that we will have unreleased increases in density in our core of the city where we all live. And we are talking about historic neighborhoods here. Yeah.
Hi, everybody hear me? Great. I'm James Howard. I am the president of the North Loop Neighborhood Association. North Loop is directly north of Hyde Park. And I'm also the chair of the North Loop planning team, which includes the North Loop Neighborhood Association, or the North Loop neighborhood, as well as the Ridgetop neighborhood, and then what we call the Red River Sliver, which is the little neighborhood that's directly west of Airport, running down Red River Street. So it's a big area directly north of Hyde Park. I'm not going to get into the details of our discussions or concerns about the proposed rewrite. I'm going to tell you briefly why I love North Loop and kind of what we're about, because I think that helps drive the process and drive the analysis. North Loop is a unique neighborhood, and we're filled with some really, really, really smart people, and much smarter than me, as I'm reminded constantly. The North Loop neighborhood and Ridgetop and the Red River area years ago came up with a neighborhood plan, and it's amazing the foresight that those people had. Some of those people are in this room, Jan Seward, for example, who's sitting in the back, others, Chris Schluterman, that I see out there. And we envisioned, that our neighborhood would be walkable. We envisioned a ton of mixed-use development in our neighborhood along our natural corridors, North Loop and Airport and Guadalupe and Lamar. But we also envisioned significant investments in infrastructure. And we have been very diligent as a neighborhood association and as a planning team in interfacing with the city and trying not to be a no group. We want to be a group that proposes solutions and not a group that poses problems. I think that's one thing that we really excel at. But we have asked time and time again for some basic infrastructure improvements that have not happened. These include sidewalks on Avenue F. These include sidewalks on 51st Street down to 35. You'll still find people walking in the street, walking in lawns to access businesses that are closer to 35. These include help maintaining our only green space, Bruning Green. These include utility upgrades. These include the most basic things like an east-west bus connecting the 7 to the 801, the 803, so that people don't have to walk on streets without sidewalks, again, walk in bike lanes and streets to access a bus route that they desperately need. So, as we look at the LDC, we want to support you, Mayor, and we want to support council, and we want to support staff in coming up with solutions. But we want to ensure as a neighborhood, and I think I can speak for almost all of us, which is very rare, we want to understand what the plans are for infrastructure and as we move towards a new LDC. But we do thank you for your diligence and for trying to achieve affordability in the city. Thank you very much.
This was for a giant. My name is Bruce Fairchild. I'm a excuse me, is that better? Okay, my name is Bruce Fairchild, and I am a longtime resident of the Hancock Neighborhood Association. I'm the treasurer of the HNA, and I'm also one of the representatives on CANPAC, which is Central Austin Neighborhood Planning Advisory Committee, which has the responsibility of following a plan that was developed some years ago that envisions how things are going to be organized. Now, if I may, my comments, I'm going to follow my script. I'm going to follow my script the best I can, but they're really aimed at the mayor because he's the decision maker in this room. So I'm going to turn sideways, and when you can't hear me talk, say something, and I'll make sure I'm back. Mayor, welcome. Thank you. I'm going to speak with respect to Hancock Neighborhood Association and its circumstances because that's what I'm familiar with. But I suspect that what I'm going to say applies to many of the neighborhoods, if not all, that are also here today. Let me describe the Hancock Neighborhood Association, or the Hancock neighborhood. It's a relatively small neighborhood. It's bordered by 45th Street on the north, 32nd Street on the south, I-35 on the east, and Duval on the west. Okay, it is a neighborhood of residential. It is a neighborhood of residential and commercial activities, and the residential consists of about 900 homes, 200 duplexes. It has 19 apartment complexes. Many of them are smaller, less than 16 units, or 32 units, but some are very large, including up to 300 units. There's also a 600 unit complex that is under construction. Now, the composition of the people that live there on the residential side are approximately 50-50 between homeowners or owner-occupied and renters. Now, there are also a lot of commercial activities within Hancock. We have Hancock Shopping Center on I-35 on the east side. As we go south, we have the Concordia development on the southeast corner. Along 32nd, there are medical offices. There's a strip center on one side of Red River at 32nd, office buildings on the other. You come up Duval and you have Duval Center. And most recently, what we have is the Perry Estate development. And that is where they're putting in an event center, a hotel, and a restaurant. So what I'm trying to say is that while we're residential, we're also commercial. And it is a residential area largely surrounded by commercial, although there are scattered small businesses throughout the neighborhood. Now, there are some nice homes in Hancock neighborhood, but the majority of them are very modest, and they're older. They were built between the First World War and the Second World War, although some newer and some older. The important part of that is because the majority of the homes are duplexes, they're older, they're apartments, the rent is relatively affordable. Also, because of the large number of duplexes and apartments in the neighborhood, it's one of, if not the most densely populated neighborhoods in Austin. Now, how did the Hancock Neighborhood Association get there? Okay, we are part of the Austin Combined Neighborhood Plan, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And it deals with the entire central part of Austin. Now, that plan was developed through 2 years of work and approved by the City Council in 2004, and it had 6 primary goals. 1, preserve the integrity and character of a single-family neighborhoods. 2, preserve the historic character and resources of the neighborhoods. Allow mixed use along existing commercial corridors. West Campus, which really is not directly related, provide a safe environment for modes of transportation, enhance and preserve existing open space, parks, and the natural environment. Now, that's what led us here. That's what Hancock Neighborhood Association. Where are we going if the proposed rezoning occurs? Well, for the Hancock Neighborhood Association, it is designated that there's 3 transit corridors, plus I-35 on the east. This is Duval that runs north and south, Red River that runs north and south, and 38th Street, which runs east-west. All right, now, we understand that these transit corridors were selected simply based, or largely based on where Capital Metro currently runs, without any necessarily more thorough analysis. All right, here's what happens. Those transit corridors are literally 4 blocks or less apart. So what this is doing in Hancock is dividing the neighborhood, or will divide under the proposed rezoning, where high density and commercial businesses basically will be back to back because there are so many transit corridors in there. Now, let me move along. It's my understanding that the proposed rezoning is intended to encourage increased commercial and residential density. In other words, replace the existing housing stock with new high-density housing. What's wrong with this plan for Hancock? First, it's at direct odds with the Central Austin Neighborhood Plan, which was a grassroots plan developed through consensus of citizens, not by some outside consultants that looked at a map and were wholly unfamiliar with what's actually on the ground in the neighborhoods they were proposing to rezone. Secondly, it will decrease, not increase, affordable housing because older structures will be demolished and replaced with new high-density residents that are in a convenient neighborhood, and this will not result in lower rents. We've had plenty of experience with that. Okay, the rezoning will push long-term residents, many of whom are elderly on fixed incomes, families, and low-income renters out of the Hancock neighborhood, leaving it mostly occupied by transient students and affluent. We talk a lot about the quality of life in Austin. That's an important factor. Okay, but the proposed rezoning, where real homes with families, old and young, trees and yards, and neighbors knowing, that'll be gone, at least in Hancock. Okay, high-density apartments and commercial buildings will replace that instead, and at least in my view, and I suspect most of the people here, that's not a high quality of life. Mayor. Mayor, what the proposed rezoning doing is taking an urban planner's theory of how a neighborhood should be structured and forcibly imposing it on Hancock. If the designers of this plan had looked at our neighborhood, they would have seen that it already embodies most of the traits that people think make a good, livable neighborhood. Put another way, Hancock already is mixed use, it's dense, and it's affordable. What this proposed planning does is basically will do nothing to improve the Hancock Neighborhood Association. Rather, it'll only destroy what's already there. Thank you.
So I'm Betsy Klubine, and I'm co-president of the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association, and we're really happy to have this group of neighborhoods together, not only because we're contiguous, but obviously because we share a lot of similar characteristics, and we also share a lot of corridors. Rather than going into what I planned and prepared to speak about today, instead I'd like to begin to open it up to the audience for your questions. And then at the end, if there are some things that people haven't had to address, then I will ask my questions and put forth my comments at that point. So what we would like to do is take questions from the audience one by one. We would like people to come forward to the speaker here. Okay, and we'll give the mayor an opportunity to answer your question. If you hear that someone has already asked your question, if you'd listen carefully, please refrain from asking it again, the same question. And if your question doesn't get answered, we'd like to ask you to use your comment card to write down your concern, and we'll make sure those get to Councilmember Tovo, to you, Mayor Adler, as well as to the Land Development Code staff at the end of the presentation. So if people would like to start coming up, how would you like to? We'll let you manage it. And if you want to answer questions.
Hi, thanks for coming. I'm Susan Moffett. Some of us here started today at a memorial service for our friend and neighbor Phil Durst, at which the rabbi asked us to be kind to each other. So I'm going to say in the kindest way I know how that many of us here feel lied to and betrayed. And my questions need some background, so please bear with me. I have two. You repeatedly said during your campaign that you wouldn't rezone the hearts of our neighborhoods, but the proposed transition area for Duval in particular dramatically upzones a 4 to 7 block wide swath directly through the hearts of many of our neighborhoods. It would allow 6 units per site with 6 unrelated adults in each unit, increase impervious cover to 60%, increase heights up to 40 feet, increase FAR to 0.8, and eliminate all on-site parking requirements, not just for the transition areas, but for virtually our entire neighborhoods. I would also note that Duval was never a corridor for land planning purposes in Imagine Austin. It only wound up as a transition area because last year Cap Metro increased the number 7 bus to every 15 minutes, but we have no way of knowing if that's a permanent change, and especially if the central city can somehow overcome our bitterness at the current code rewrite and actually vote to support the transit bond next year, that may all change. Overall, the multiple transition areas proposed for Hyde Park and many of these other neighborhoods would substantially upzone and incentivize the teardown of well over a third, nearly a half of our neighborhoods. But the worst part is that all of these extremely valuable new base entitlements are being handed over by right with no affordability requirement at all. We know what the dirt costs in our neighborhoods. We know what new construction costs are, so we know that none of these new transition zone units, no matter how tiny, will be remotely affordable, let alone family friendly, unless the city requires it, which the current draft does not do. So, my two questions. One, will you support removing Duval as a transition area to keep your promise not to upzone the hearts of our neighborhoods? And two, will you attach a strong affordability requirement to the proposed increases in new base entitlements for transition areas and for the city as a whole? Thank you.
So let me begin by saying I appreciate the opportunity to be invited to be with you. Absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
And to be able to put in perspective the answers that I give, because I think it's important. The land development code that we have in the city of Austin is 30 years old.
And our neighborhood was built in the late 80s.
Right. So the number of people that come up to me from all over the city, not just your neighborhood, and quite frankly, this used to be my neighborhood too. I lived at the southwest corner of 44th and Avenue C. I lived on 32nd, just 2 blocks east of Guadalupe. We have problems with the existing code that we have because it's led to too much localized flooding. It's led to the situation we have too many tear downs all over the city where big homes are being built in place of small homes that exist. We have problems with the existing code that we have. We know that as in the city where 74% of the people are commuting downtown every day alone in their single family cars, that as our city goes from 1 million people to 2 million people over the next 20 to 25 years, that our city's not going to survive unless we change how it is that people move around our city. And we know that how we do a land development code impacts how it is that people move around the city. I hear the things that you're saying about affordability with respect to the revision of the land development code. And I'll tell you that there's considerable debate on the city council as to how those issues shake out. I will tell you that there are council members that represent districts that are not the more affluent districts in our city that take a look at the same affordability issues that you are looking at least the people that have asked questions or applauded, and come to very different conclusions than the conclusions that you come to. Because they're pushing an agenda that also is seeking affordability, and they're the ones that are the strongest advocates for some of the things that you're challenging also on affordability grounds. Where we are with respect to the code is the staff has made a recommendation. Quite frankly, I've been spending a lot of the last week on issues other than the land development code. So there are probably people in the room here today that know the staff's recommendation better than I do. There are people that are in the room today from the city staff who, if there are questions about the code in particular, I hope that they're here. Is the city staff here in the room? Ah, there you guys are, behind me. Thanks for walking up. They're here to be able to answer questions as well. And if you have a better answer or a more complete answer to anything I say, please stand up and give it to the folks in the room. But let me go ahead and speak to the question that Susan has specifically asked. And the first question is Duval a transit corridor as we think of corridors in the city? And the answer to that is yes. Now there are different kinds of corridors that exist in the city. There are commercial corridors and there are residential corridors. So nobody is suggesting that Duval is a corridor like Guadalupe or like Lamar or like other commercial corridors in the city. But it's a corridor that has a transit route that has some of the most dramatic increases in transit usage recently. Now, and this is a good example because I've read the same information that you have on the emails that have appeared on your neighborhood listserv that talk about that transit line. And someone is actually suggesting to you that transit ridership on that line is down. And I think that that's a really good example because it's really important as we go through this discussion that everybody learn what the real facts are so that you can evaluate and give them meaning. The transit line that exists in this area extends not only nearby where we are, but further north. And here about a year and a half ago, the part of that line was lopped off. Now, if you compare the entire transit ridership for that line, including the part that got lopped off, to the part that exists today, but with the part lopped off, then it's true there's a decrease in ridership, but that's because that top part that got lopped off is now on a different route. But if you compare year to year, the same part of that line, so that you're comparing apples to apples, ridership is up 6%, 6 point some odd percent in the last month. And in fact, it's gone up so much that the Capital Metro people tell me that at this point it's one of the lines that's being considered for increased frequency. Now I mention that just because I have read the same emails that you read, both on social media and on the local listserv. And if I believed, and I don't know that if I was just living in the neighborhood like I used to live in the neighborhood, everything that I read on those, I think that I would come, probably me, to different conclusions than I come to otherwise. But the question is, with respect to Duval, that is a corridor. It's a residential corridor. It's a transit corridor. It has a transit line that goes down that corridor. There are a lot of people that use that line. And in our city over the next 20 or 25 years, the hope is that there are more and more people that use that transit line. So when we look around the city, when the council was sitting down trying to decide what the overarching planning levels were, they said we should put density in certain places and we should avoid putting density in certain places. And we established high-level rules. If an area was rapidly gentrifying, that it's an area that we probably wanted to pull back on. If it was an area that had a transit corridor, probably an area we wanted to move forward on. If it was an area that was an environmentally sensitive area or an area with a lot of hills, probably pull back on. If it's an area that has a grid system that makes it easier to be able to walk, maybe it easier to be able to use transit, then you probably move forward on. And the staff took those criteria, which were not aimed at any particular neighborhood, but generally had planning principles behind them, and have now applied them. Now that gives you as the community the opportunity to be able to come in now at this point in the process and say, when that general principle of planning was applied to this area or the area that I lived in, it doesn't lead to a result that we think is right. And that's the process they're in right now. And you have the opportunity now, while it's in front of the Planning Commission, while it's in front of the City Council through the end of the year on first reading, into next year, when it's before the council on second and third reading, you have opportunities to be able to come back. The staff has put together a specific program and announced principles so that neighborhoods collectively could come back to the council and say, or back to staff first, and then to the council later, and say, we've looked at the maps, we understand the general desire for certain increased capacity in the neighborhood, and we want to propose a different way to be able to achieve the same result, so that opportunity exists as well. We have tied, just the last question Susan asked was to tie to affordability. A considerable amount, if not most, of the new entitlements that are presented by this code are tied to affordability. In fact, and that was one of the specific directions that the council gave to the staff. Now, does that mean that every new entitlement in the city is tied to affordability? No. But one of the most significant things this council did, as opposed to directions in the past, was to say that there has to be a lot greater tie to affordability provisions. And this code contains a lot more preservation incentives, which means that unlike earlier drafts of the code, if someone were to preserve an existing house on a lot and not tear it down, you're entitled to additional benefits than if you tear down the house that you have and build a McMansion in place of it. Because this code was intended to build preservation tools and interests that did not exist in the prior code. Am I wrong about that? Does it do those things? Would you come up and explain the preservation thing? I mean, but my concern is that I said it contains preservation. There are a lot of people in the community that obviously think differently. I have the people that wrote the code and applied the code, and they're here. If you actually want to learn what's real and what's true in this, we have the staff here for you to be able to answer those questions.
Tear down and preserve.
I'm sorry?
How do you tear down and preserve?
You can't.
That
So
makes
the
no sense.
no, you didn't. Then I did. That's not what I
Yes,
said.
that's what you said.
I said if you do not tear down the existing house, that's what a preservation incentive
How do
is.
you tear down to get density and preserve?
This is what I'm going to suggest. In the spirit of getting to everybody's questions, I appreciate your offer to have the staff answer that. What I will suggest that we do is submit a request to staff, and then we'll be able to share on our listservs and on Nextdoor information about the preservation bonus as described in the code. In the spirit of getting to everybody, please keep your questions concise. Let's roll through these and move on. Thank you, Mayor, for your time on that.
Thank you, Mayor, for being here. I'd like to welcome you to the Hancock neighborhood. We are an Imagine Austin community with our existing code. But one of the questions I have is why is this code change being pushed through so quickly when we have not seen, without the environmental impact studies that are necessary for watershed and tree protection? Hancock neighborhood has very small lots. We're very dense. Most of us have ADUs in the back. We have, Bruce explained, we have mixed housing stock. But if you try to put in that density, what happens to our tree ordinances? You're going to try to do away with them. We've already been battling to keep RECA from, is that what happens to our canopy? We're an older neighborhood. We have heritage trees. We have protected trees. This makes us a walkable neighborhood. This makes us a pedestrian-friendly neighborhood. This makes us a family-friendly neighborhood that kids can be out in the yard in the summertime. Where are those impact studies? We have a Waller Creek going through our neighborhood. We are on a watershed. What happens when we have more impervious cover? You have not answered these questions. Also,
My concern so far is not that I'm not answering the questions, but that you don't like my answers. The answer to the question about a tree ordinance is that the tree ordinances that we had in place are still in place. And the guarantees with respect to trees that were under the existing code are in place under the current code. Now, I have read the same things that you've read, which suggest that that's not true. And I hear from people in the audience that they think that it's not true, that we're doing away with those. If you like, we have the staff here that can confirm that. But I would suggest to you that what you are reading in your materials that are being sent is not accurately telling you what the code says. So the answer to your question is it would be outrageous if we were to give away all the trees that we have in our city. It would be horrible. It would be dumb. It would hurt our environment. It would lead to all kinds of problems in the city, which is why I wouldn't support a code that did that kind of thing. And the code that's being proposed, fortunately, does not do those things.
well, what about watershed?
So overall in the city, the one of the goals that we said that the code had to meet in this case was that it had to decrease flooding within the city, and it had to increase water quality in the city, and this code does that. There are impervious cover. Impervious cover is a really important thing, and in a lot of cases, impervious cover has a direct correlation to flooding and to water quality. And it's a really important thing, and in most individual parts of our city, the impervious cover goes down. There are a couple areas where it does not. Overall in the city, it does. But it's also not the only way that a city or a community can address water quality. or detention in this city. There are other things that can be done too. And there are a lot of things in this code that were designed specifically to improve water quality and improve flooding in this city, which is one of the reasons why there are environmental groups in this city that are supporting the code for exactly those provisions that are now being built into this code that don't exist under the existing code.
And the other part of that study would be infrastructure demands to put in this sort of density. As North Loop said, we are, we don't get a lot of infrastructure improvements in our neighborhoods. And if it takes, having some developers come in and just redo our neighborhoods to get infrastructure, I think that's really a horrible statement as to how you have valued these neighborhoods in the past. But I would like to see how this infrastructure is going to be put in place by the city.
I agree with you. It would be absolutely horrible if this city were only dependent on developers, and if we were willing to sell out all of the property in this city in order to get the infrastructure that's done in our city. But I'm really proud to be part of a city. We had a bond election in 2016 that had $60 million for sidewalks in the city. That's more than we've ever done in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the community getting together. And the way that they decide where sidewalks go in this city is there's a process and criteria that establishes where the greatest needs are, both in terms of health and safety, as well as equity. And those principles are applied to sidewalks across the city. You need more sidewalks in this area because the $60 million that we had was really small compared to the relative stuff that we need. And the fact that $60 million thus far in large part has been spent in other neighborhoods other than this one really tells you something about where, because you know how great the need is in this neighborhood. The fact that there are other neighborhoods in the city that have even greater needs than this neighborhood has is something that really points out to us both what's happening in the city, but it also points out to us how much more we have to invest in infrastructure, and I support that as well.
Hi, my name is Tammy, and I would like to say that I made Austin my home. I'm an immigrant to this country, left my country at 99, moved to Austin in 2003, and lived in Hyde Park since 2004. I find Austin a very welcoming and hospitable place to be, far more from many places I have lived in before. And I choose to live here, and I love all these people around me. And this is an honor for me to be able to participate in this thing. I would like to say that as my background, I lived 27 years in the Middle East. When I saw your proposal, the Middle East button came up and was like, it's very extreme. I wonder is the first point for haggling. Because it seemed like there must be a middle line somewhere. I'm an immigrant, I love it, I'm welcoming more people to come. I don't want to shut down the place. I mean, it's growing, as long as it's growing in a way that's logical and still can be welcoming to everybody here. I hope it didn't take anybody's space when I moved here. That's okay. And a lot of people talked about all kinds of things, so I'm not going to repeat them. But the one thing that I would like to bring up is parking. I'm concerned. 4 units, 8 units, maybe 4 people per unit, living per unit, maybe 6. I don't know. Where is everybody going to park? When I have guests, where are they going to park? If I have a yard guy come work, where will he put his trailer? The parking seems extreme and as taking it away incompletely. I understand some accommodation needs to be done, but to wipe out parking as per units seems a bit extreme. I think that there has to be a middle way, and again, this seems like so extreme, not just the parking, everything else, I just feel like it's a, like when you buy a house, you give one offer, they give another, maybe we'll find a middle, and I really hope, because the way it is, I hope to still love Austin. Thank you.
Well, as you might imagine, the discussions on the council dais, and I expect in front of the Planning Commission and the Community on Parking, are some of the more difficult conversations that we have, because the answers with respect to parking have different people on so many different sides pulling really hard so many different ways. I would point out that with respect to parking, that our city in 30 years will not survive if we continue to move around the city and deal with parking the way that we do. Now, downtown, we've removed parking requirements in many instances, but I think you'll find that the buildings that are all being built in downtown still provide parking. Because ultimately, whether or not something has parking on it is a decision that you make. When you go to buy a house, most of you, I think, probably in this room, if you were looking for a house, you would want the house to have a parking space, or you'd want it to have a garage, or you'd want it to have that kind of amenity for you. I think in the market and the situation we exist right now, that's probably going to be something that continues to happen in our city, whether there's a parking requirement or not. Just like parking, we have huge parking garages that are being built downtown without a requirement for that to happen, because that's what people want. But I will tell you that over time, but I'll tell you that over time, this city is not going to be, if the city's going to survive, it's going to survive because we're able to get a mode shift in this community, which means ultimately we actually have to provide a mobility system that's as convenient and as inexpensive and it is in fact a better and more viable choice for people than being in their cars. But ultimately, the question of parking is something that's hotly debated, and the degree to which you require parking can have a huge impact on affordability and what you can build and what things cost. So when the council was looking at this question, and when the Planning Commission looks at it, and the debate that I hope the community has over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months on this question while this is being discussed, I think go to the trade-offs that are involved between the environment and parking, between affordability and parking, mobility and parking, because parking impacts all of those questions.
Thank you, Mayor, for attending and allowing us to ask you these questions. I live in Schofield North, and I heard about this meeting, so I wanted to attend. So, like Tammy, I also moved to Austin almost 10 years ago, and I remember a friend of mine saying, well, Enzo, when you move to Austin, you never want to leave. And I think he's right, because it's because of the neighborhoods. It's because of the city. So the other week, I attended a little meeting in in Schofield, and one of your former city planners mentioned that, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to answer this question. He said, there's no other city in the United States of America that is following this methodology for this type of zoning, which I think is ridiculous. I think it's too extreme.
When you say no one's following the methodology, what
Well,
do
I
you
mean, the zoning where you've taken a whole city and you've made it everything M6, M3. My house, I have a small 6,000 square foot house, 4 bedrooms. So, no, not the house, the lot. I wish. I wouldn't be here if I was. I'd have my butler here.
They were applauding you like me here a second ago.
So anyways, my house backs onto Palmer, and I could build up to 10 units on my house. But I don't think my neighbors would really like it. I have one of my neighbors here with me who lives down the street, and hers is M4. Like, where does this come about? Like, how can someone buy my house and build, if I sold it and decided to go back to New York or to San Francisco and build 10 units, like, what does it do to our neighborhood? We've got beautiful trees and great neighbors. And what about our taxes? Now, all of a sudden, my property is M6. I can build a 4-story building on it. My taxes are going to go up, but I'm only living in a 2,000 square foot house. So can you answer the first one about what other city in the United States of America has this type of zoning? And I'm glad you brought your staff with you.
Right. So I think that most of the cities in the country are rezoning right now. Big cities like this are rezoning to increase density. They're rezoning to help facilitate transportation. most of the cities in the country are doing this. Most of the cities that I visited in the world over the last 5 years that are growing cities like this are dealing with the same kind of affordability issues we are. Most of them are trying to increase density and increase the viability of mobility in the city. But let me talk for a second about the question that you've asked about taxes, because again, I read the same thing that you read on the listservs and in the neighborhood stuff, and the suggestion that because it's not insulting, let me talk about, you can judge for yourself whether what you're reading is accurate or not. But the question is, if you have your homestead and it's in an area that's been upzoned, whether that's, and you keep it as your homestead, but it's been upzoned, and perhaps there are people next door to you or on your street that then take advantage of that upzoning. Hopefully they preserve their home on it because there's a preservation tool.
Who's going to determine that? Who's going to determine that?
But whether or not they use the preservation tool, let's say that they expand the number of units on it, but you're continuing to live in your 2,000 square foot homestead, can the taxing entity value your property for more money as if it were this higher use or this better use that people are putting on the track next to you as they put 3 or 4 units on that track?
That's what happens now.
And section 23.01D, listen to this, says that the market value of a resident's homestead shall be determined solely on the basis of the property's value as a resident's homestead, regardless of whether the residential use of the property by the owner is considered to be the highest and best use of the property. Which means that the Texas law says that your value of your homestead will be valued as your homestead, even if someone would make the argument that there's a higher and better use for your property. Now, I don't mean to be offensive to anyone who is writing to anything, but I will tell you that as I'm sitting at the city council right now, and I'm reading the kinds of things that are being sent to people that are scaring people, that are saying things to them that are not true, that are getting people alarmed as on things that are not true. It's not right. It's just not right, and it's not fair.
Okay, so why can't you do it in piecemeal? Why does it have to be so extreme? Like all of a sudden, the entire city of Austin. Why can't you start off with a certain corridor, see how it works before you destroy the whole city?
So it's true that there are people, as we elect people from 10 different council districts across the city, that people come from those 10 different districts with different constituencies and different desires. And it is true that there are several people of the council that would go much farther than this code goes, because that's what they think would be the best thing for the city generally, and that's what they believe. But that doesn't. But if they do it just in their district, they're not reaching the goals that they want for their city as well. So as part of the debate that we're having, and it's the part of the debate that'll go on for the several months that we're involved in this, I think that we will find whatever it is that compromise or that balance that fits within the different viewpoints and the different interests of the people in the city.
Hi, my name is Jean Bertrand. I live on Avenue H between the 42nd and 43rd blocks. As you know, Hyde Park was started around the late 1800s, early 1900s, when cars were just getting started. So the terrain was up here and the roads were down here. As more and more cars came on the road, things got paved, so eventually some of the roads are higher than the lots. One example where underneath my house is lower than the road. So I'm affected by any increase in impervious cover, and I know some of y'all are, and you don't know it. So, So I'm asking you to do not just a swath of drainage, investigation, but localized, where you go to individual sites and look at people's drainage. Sorry. I'm sorry, I've spent $20,000 on drainage on my house. And if my neighbor built a garage that was a slab garage, I would get his water. And they're looking at putting, if you guys want to put a 6-unit dwelling, I would get his water. If you know my house, I have a rain garden that's huge in the front and in the back. And I'm telling you, some of my neighbors don't even know the type of water they're getting under their homes. And this causes black mold. And so if you're doing drainage studies across a swath of neighborhoods, that's not good enough. You need to go house to house, street to street, block to block, because it's localized. And a lot of it is because Hyde Park was built before cars were on the roads. So can I have your word that you will look at blocks and assess blocks for drainage issues?
I think it's important, as we go through this code, there are a lot of things that are reflected in this code that are general principles that have been applied across the city. And I think that it's important for people at this point in the process to raise how those broader goals or broader things that they've applied across the city impact individual lots. So yes, that is something to bring up. In the law in the state of Texas, you're not allowed under law. You violate law if you channel the water from your property and send it over a neighbor's lot. It's not. It's against the law for someone to be able to do.
Hi, Kathy Eccles, and as
You have to detain it on the property or set up drainage or other kinds of things to take care of the flow on your track.
well, first of all, I have a lot of things I'd like to ask, so I'll try to triage. But one question is, sort of this, why the rush? And I've heard people say, we've already talked about all of these issues, but in fact, in this new version of the code, there are a lot of things that are quite different, and particularly as pertaining to our neighborhood. So, and I say this partly as I'm a longtime affordable housing advocate. I've been working on affordable housing issues for many years and involved, and we're scrambling to try to figure out the affordable housing implications. With Planning Commission coming up next week, it seems like, even as experts, we're trying to sort through to figure out the implications. I will say, with regard to this affordability question, I think it is a little bit better with regard to multifamily in terms of having the base zonings, the affordability requirements associated with increase in density being better than in the code next. But I think where the issue comes in is in the single-family upzonings, the affordability, there's so few affordability requirements, so they kick in so high that these estimates of income-restricted affordable housing are just completely off, because nobody's going to take advantage of them because they get so much without having to do any affordability. So that's one issue. And I am concerned about the issue of, especially in a neighborhood like this, as expensive as it is, that as we tear things down, the things that are going to get built there, even if they're denser, are still going to be a lot more expensive. And so I do wonder about, if we really want to increase affordability in high opportunity neighborhoods, that needs to happen in neighborhoods that aren't in these incredibly dense, expensive neighborhoods. And I'm not saying that we can't add any more density to our neighborhood, but I think that we have been adding density for a number of years in ways that really do work for keeping the neighborhood quality while adding density. And one particular, when you talk about missing middle housing, one thing that worries me is one type of missing middle that we really need in the central city is housing for families. And certainly things like duplexes, houses with large secondary units, we're seeing some of those being condoized and turned into
you know, we're getting a couple families in, which is wonderful to see that, these kinds of increases in density that aren't so huge seem to be succeeding in bringing families into the central city, family with little kids. But when you're talking about something like 8-plexes or even 4-plexes, that's not the kind of housing that's going to attract families with children. I mean, it would if it were inexpensive, because then lower income families would be attracted to the high opportunity areas. But these are not going to be inexpensive housing. They're not going to be affordable to low income families. So if we really want to keep families in the central city, we need to be really thinking about what kind of housing is the right kind of housing to help support families in the central city. And I guess the one kind of final thing I wanted to ask about is the transit issues, because when we think about increasing transit lines, we need to not just only have density in the central city, we need to have the density that's out there so that people are actually taking that transit into the central city. And I know in Imagine Austin, there were these ideas about these activities centers that would be in various places in town, so everybody wouldn't have to be coming into the central city. And I don't see a lot of evidence of that in here, and I'm sorry I had so many questions. But
Well, there are a lot of questions in it. Let me see how well I can do it. I'm not sure I'll catch all of them. If I don't, grab me later or call me. You know, as I go around the city, and I have the opportunity to be in neighborhood meetings all over the city. A lot of the neighborhood meetings I go into, people are really upset at me because I am coming back yet again to talk about a rewrite of the land development code. And they're pretty much incensed at me, and they want me, they can't believe the councils is still dealing with this, and they can't believe we're taking as long to do this project and have spent as much money as we are, and they are demanding that we just decide. So as you go around the city, different neighborhoods around the city, I go into those same neighborhoods around the city, and their question about affordability and increased housing supply sounds very different from the conversation here. It is neighborhoods, generally speaking, that are not as affluent as this one, and they believe, and their representatives believe on the council, that by increasing the housing supply in the city, that it's going to help housing values generally in the city. I will tell you that the instruction that this council gave to the staff was to maximize at every turn that it possibly could the affordability and the links to affordability as they did the code. As we go through this conversation that we're about to have here over this next period of time, if you see additional opportunities for us to be able to wring out additional affordability elements, this is a council that is really predisposed to do that in as many different places and as many different ways as we can. It's also a council that is really leaning into trying to create more opportunities for families in the city, and have tried to do that by the code and by the incentives that are built into the code. But if you can think of further or additional ways we could do that, again, I think you find that you have a council that would be leaning into that also. Yes.
Hi, Mayor Adler. My name is
Hi.
Rosemary Stewart, and I want to thank you for being here. I know you're fighting many different battles, and
That's okay.
we're grateful for your time.
Thank you.
I live in the Hancock neighborhood, just a few houses away from Lee Elementary. How many times have you been to Lee Elementary?
Dozens.
It's a great school, don't you
It
think?
is.
It's beloved to us. We're so grateful to be in that neighborhood and so grateful for our public school. I believe that if we pursue the current plan, there will be mass teardowns and rebuilds. The neighborhood will become more expensive and less affordable. I believe that the people who will move into our neighborhood will be the kind of people who don't have young children, and if they have children, they're sending their kids to private school. And as far as I know, AISD has an enrollment problem. So my question for you is, when this neighborhood becomes extremely dense, our school is already at capacity. So assuming it's the socioeconomic level of families who will send their kids to public school, what will you do with an overflowing single elementary school? Thank you.
I think the goal or the stated objective that we gave to the staff when they were designing this version of the code was to build in as many incentives as they possibly could to help ensure that we were stopping or at least mitigating the trend that exists under the existing code of tearing down existing homes. And that's why the plan as presented to us by staff contains numerous preservation incentives. If those preservation incentives are not calibrated correctly, or they don't work, or they're not going to drive the preservation of the homes that exist, then we need to fix that, because that's what the goal was that the council gave to the staff to develop the code. So if they don't do that, then in this period of time that we're together, that's one of the things that we need to work on, because that was the request from the council to give us tools that would stop or at least mitigate against the number of homes that are being torn down and big homes being built all over the city right now under the existing code. So the question you asked me is what happens to the school when a school overflows, right? And the answer to that is I don't do any of the stuff for schools. So I don't do the stuff for schools, but quite frankly, if we could bring a lot more families or a lot more people with children to our city, I think that for all the reasons that other people have asked, that's something that the city would profit by, and then the school district, I would hope, would be accommodating the families that lived here.
So I'm just saying, as a mayor
Yes.
of the city,
Yes.
you don't take into consideration the planning of schools, that you make a plan and the schools need to follow?
No.
That's what I heard.
No. She questions what I was going to do about the overflowing school, and I don't adjust boundaries or anything for schools. I don't do that. But the district has been involved in the process and has worked with our staff, and they've been meeting on lots. I haven't personally been in those meetings, but in many parts of this city, the schools are not overflowing, and there's a desire to increase the number of families. There was a person who was just up here a second ago who was talking about bringing more families into the area. Again, the goal of the code is to help with affordability and equity in the city, and we were asked to design a code that did that. It's going to require calibration. It has a lot of affordability elements that have never existed in this city before. Yes.
My name is Betsy Greenberg, and I live in the Heritage neighborhood. I expected that many people would criticize the code tonight because of occupancy, group residential, transition zones, flooding. In other words, all the ways this code will affect the livability of our neighborhoods. While I think these issues are important, I'd like to ask you about some of the results on the Land Development Code Revision Report Card. And I didn't read about the report card on the listserv or next door. It comes from the city's website, as does most of the information that people are reading the code and looking at the maps, okay? But anyway, this was provided to you by staff at the October 8th meeting. The Strategic Housing Blueprint says we need 145,000 units and 60,000 income-restricted units. The draft code provides capacity for 397,000 units, almost triple of what is an exaggerated requirement. But for the more critical need of 60,000 income-restricted units, the draft only provides capacity for 9,000 units. While the state does tie our hands on many tools that could help with affordability, this code draft is a giveaway of entitlements with not enough affordable housing expected in return. I would give this report card an F. Mayor, are you going to insist on a land development code that earns a passing grade on affordability, at least a B-?
So the housing supply, the additional homes that the council adopted as the goal was the 135,000 roughly homes for the city. And then the experts tell us that if you actually want to have 135,000 homes built, you have to create more than 135,000 opportunities, because you're not going to have a home built with every opportunity that you create. And the advice that was given to the council was that if you are really serious about wanting to have 135,000 more homes, then you have to create 3 times those many opportunities in order to be able to drive those homes. That's what the experts told us. That makes sense to me, because I know that not every housing opportunity is going to get built. That would have been 405,000, and that was the direction that the council gave the staff to try to hit. They didn't hit it at 405. They only came up with like 397. And ultimately, the community has to decide whether that's close enough to that goal. I think it's close enough to that goal. Now, we also need 65,000 homes that are basically available at below market rates or below market prices, because we have so many people in this city with property values going up across the city as much as they are. And in order to be able to do those below market homes, there needs to be some measure of subsidy or counter market activity. What we're told is that the Land Development Code is a tool to help drive those homes, but not the most effective tool, or the tool that's going to give us the greatest number of those units, because there's a real limit to what we can do with the Land Development Code. But even though there's a limit to what the Land Development Code can do, we need to make sure that the code does every bit that it is able to do. Most of those 60,000 units are going to come from things like the housing bond that this community passed. It was a really significant investment that this community made in affordable housing. That's where most of that kind of housing stock comes from. But the Land Development Code with the 9,000 is everything that the staff said that you're able to wring out toward that 60,000 goal that you can get. But I will tell you that if they've missed something in that, if there's a way to get greater affordability in the city, it'd be something that I'd be really interested in seeing. Now, there are some on the council that believe that it's really important to have affordability, but they also believe that housing supply itself is also a really important thing to be able to have in the city. Housing supply at all levels of a market, because when you have increased housing levels of supply at all levels of the market, it benefits all levels of the market. But for me, if you can identify ways they did not catch or see that would help us get greater affordability and still get the housing supply we want in the city, that'd be something I'd be really interested in. That was the direction they had gotten. Yes, sir.
Mayor Adler, my name is George Purcell.
Yes, sir.
I would like to, this is a very rushed process. We've only seen the map for about a week. We've only seen the code for about a week. In my background as an analyst for the legislature, I understand how complex things can lead to unexpected outcomes. There is a gaping hole in this code that could really affect affordability, and it has to do with short-term rentals. In the code, I have my house will be RM1, and fairly enough, I'm on Avenue B, close to Guadalupe, probably should be upzoned. But I wanted to read about what RM1, a single-family house going into RM1, means. What it means is that I can build a Type 3, I could have a Type 3 STR. Anyone who has a single-family house in RM1 can have a Type 3 STR, and the code specifically says on a parcel you are allowed at least one Type 3 STR unit. The day this code passes as written, every single-family house in an RM1 zone can become a Type 3 short-term rental. That is a problem.
I share the concern, and I have had my staff raise that same question with staff. I believe that housing that's going off for short-term rentals in neighborhoods not only impacts the quality of life in that neighborhood, but removes housing stock in the city for the people that live in the city. So I share the same concern. I don't have an answer to those concerns yet. All I can tell you is that I've read it as well. I've raised the same concern.
A simple answer would be to eliminate the part of the code that gives you a 1 unit by right in the code. And then the answer goes away. Because at that point in time, you have to have percentages, and if you have only 1 unit, you can't make the percentage.
Well, you know, you can either address the over proliferation of short-term rentals by saying we're not going to create the opportunity for auxiliary dwelling units in a city, or you can do it by restricting the number of short-term rentals. And my guess is that there'll probably be more people on the council that would support still enabling people to build ADUs in more places or auxiliary dwelling units in more places, but not to allow the use of those for short-term rentals. All I can say is I have the same concern you have, and I've raised the same question.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here, Mayor. Tony
Yes.
Larson. I live on Duval, so I'm kind of ground zero of this development. Currently, it's a SF3 that I live in. It's going to get upzoned to RM1. I'm there with my family, 2 children. I think it's ill-guided to change Duval to a corridor or treat it as a corridor. I think looking at it from 30,000 feet, sure, it does have a bus route on it. That's true. I take that bus every day. I either take the 7 to work or I take the train. You're right, the ridership is going up on the 7, but I think it's close to capacity. If you don't believe me, I would recommend trying to get on the 7 at the university around between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock, and it's standard room only. As SF3, look from 51st Street to 56th Street. There's 66 single-family homes. 30 of those homes already have accessory dwelling units on it. So organically, we've already increased density. We've done this in Koenig Flats area, we've increased density. Travis County, we've increased density. So without switching Duval to RM1, we're helping here. There's 30 houses that already have accessory dwelling units out of these 66. There's 10 more that have been restored, mine included. You're really hurting us by changing the codes on us midstream to RM1. RM1 is going to allow 10 units to be built. It moves the front offset to 10 feet from the street. Currently it's 25 feet. It raises the elevation of the house to 40 feet. So you're talking about all of us living next to these mass apartment units that are in a neighborhood. And I just got to say, I'm a little disappointed that you would come here and say, what was the question?
I'm sorry.
What was the question you asked? Did you ask if it was actually 10 or 6?
Yeah, and I'll talk about the 10 in just a second.
Yeah, so it's 6. So we do read your code. We don't just put fake news on our listservs. It's actually pretty educated on there if you read it. It's 6 units, but if you, and this is a question to you, I believe if you have 1 low-income unit on your property, you can upscale that to 10 units. There's no parking restrictions, off-street parking required. So 10 cars now, if you assume 1 car per place, that's unlikely. It's going to be 2 cars per unit. So you're looking at anywhere from 10 to 20 cars per unit. That's insane. That's not, you don't have the infrastructure to deal with that. And just one simple thing, and I know there's people behind me, but table 23, 3D, 3040. This isn't just something that we invented. It says if you have a offset of 10 feet, minimum % of front yard required to be planted in landscape, not applicable. Large and medium trees required, not applicable. Small trees required, front yard landscaping, not applicable. How are you going to deal with that?
So I'm going to ask you guys to speak to most of the specifics with respect to the zoning category. But the question that I asked, because I heard, was that were we zoning all of the lots in a way that would end up with 10 units on the lot because the zoning classification allowed for 10 units. And as we looked at the individual lots, most of the lots that were zoned that way would never have 10 units on them.
How do you guarantee that?
Well, because by the development restrictions, because of the size of the lot itself.
So 6,000 feet, 6,000 square feet allows you to have 10?
I don't, but the zoning allows for that, but as a practical matter, what could actually...
How do you regulate a practical matter if it's not...
If you're only allowed a certain amount of impervious cover on a lot, and you only have a certain amount of land area
60%
in the
impervious
lot,
cover?
whatever, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the number.
We call those folks
Yeah.
up.
So you're increasing
But- but-
impervious cover from 45 to
You want to speak to
60%?
I mean,
And you're doing this in Waller Creek, by the way.
Hi, Greg Dutton, Planning and Zoning. So you are correct, it's 60%
Thank you.
in RM. We're talking about RM.
And you're doing RM1 from university all the way up to 56. Yeah.
So you are absolutely correct. The change in impervious cover is 45% to 60% under the proposed
In the Waller
zoning.
Creek drainage.
And it was changed because when we did testing of the zones to figure out if they were feasible to accommodate all those units, the result was, as you might imagine, it's more feasible if you have additional impervious cover for those lots. It's a practical effect of having more FAR and additional units.
Of course, that makes total sense.
Sure.
If you're,
about the impervious cover in the area. Is there, I represented earlier that the council had asked for there to be decreased flooding in this city by virtue of this code. Does that happen?
So there are, I don't work in watershed, but there are breakouts by watershed of the impervious cover changes. And I think as the mayor mentioned, in some watersheds it goes up a little bit, in some it goes down. Citywide, the change, and you might have read this in the staff report, so there's a change of 0.2% increase in impervious cover citywide, which is a few hundred acres out of 100 and some thousand. Okay.
Thanks for being here. So your question is, and I'll try to answer the question.
have you thought about the environmental implications of
Yes.
of increasing? What are you going to do about it? And
I
if you
think
can have
that
an
it's really
off-
important. I think it's really important in the city to make sure that we improve water quality in the city. It's really important in the city that we decrease flooding. It's also really important in the city that we increase density in the city and we increase housing supply. It's also really important in the city that we increase the ability for transit to be able to work in our city. All those things are important. And on balance, we have to make sure that we deliver all those things. And as you watch the council deliberate, there are some council members that champion some of those issues over other issues because everybody has a different set of priorities. So with respect to any particular lot in any particular area, that particular lot may not be the lot that maximizes transit and maximizes the environment and maximizes environmental quality and maximizes density and maximizes supply. All the lots aren't going to do that, but what you do want to do when you're doing a citywide plan is making sure that the citywide plan delivers the kinds of things that you want the citywide plan to deliver. And that's what the staff was tasked to do.
Thank you. I would say based on the uncertainty you're venting right here, I would relook at Duval with a little more granularity.
Sure.
Hello, my name's Tim McCarthy. I'm a renter in Hyde Park right here, a student at the university who doesn't own a car and only rarely uses my wife's. And it's good that we just heard from someone who lives on Duval and rides the bus. Now you're hearing from another such person. I live along Duval, and in fact, I actually attend this church. So by way of introduction, a little bit about myself. I used to live in Chicago, about a block and a half from Clark Avenue, which connects downtown Chicago to the northern suburbs, and it's the beating heart of the city's north side. It connects its most vibrant and diverse and livable neighborhoods, and I've traveled it frequently by bike, by car, by bus, and on foot. Now, you might think that such a road would be some huge 6-lane road, but you would be wrong. It's only 2 lanes, one in either direction. Smash cut to now, I live in Duval Street in Austin, and it's one of the main arteries that I use to get myself around Austin. Everywhere from downtown to UT where I am a student to when I worked at the Domain this summer, up to the Red Line trains at Highland and Crestview. I walk its good sidewalks. Many people in this room have noted that those are a rarity in Hyde Park. I ride its bike lanes that are some of the busiest in the city, and I ride the frequent 7 bus, which, as anyone who rides it can tell you, it's usually packed to the rafters during the morning and evening rush hour. So that's why I was glad to see that the Land Development Code currently recognizes it as a transportation network priority corridor, and I was dismayed to see that some of my neighbors, like many people in this room, do not agree. You've heard people tell you that it shouldn't be designated transportation network priority corridor because it's only 2 lanes. Now, in my mind, that is a remarkably short-sighted and car-centric viewpoint, at odds with my experience, at odds with the interests of renters and students like myself, and at odds with our goals as a city. Duval is a multimodal street. Using non-car means of travel is all the more feasible there because it is only 2 lanes, not some roaring 6-lane highway. Now, I know a lot of people in this room are suspecting that new developments might not be affordable, and that concern is valid and well taken. But the concern that Duval specifically is not the right place is not well taken. Duval supports all the multimodal transportation that we need to become a compact, connected city, and it is nothing if not a transportation network priority corridor. I thank the city for designating it as such, and I hope that car-centric views do not derail this admirable effort. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks to everyone in this room, too, because we're all here trying to help find good solutions.
Hi, Sumi. Please forgive me. I just want to remind folks that we have about 20 minutes left before we need to wrap up this meeting. I've gotten some guarantees that we can, again, submit questions afterwards to the city team, and we will, of course, be collecting those. But as we move through, if everybody in the line wants, I don't think we'll be able to get to everybody, but I think we should go for 3 or 4 or 5 more people and move quickly, please. And again, thank you, Mayor, for taking the time.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And like the immediately previous speaker, I also ride my bike or take the bus practically every day. In the last 6 years, I have probably commuted by bus or bike 6 to 12 times a week. And I never drive to work, nor does my wife. Now, I disagree, however, with him that a 2-lane road is adequate for a transit corridor. Buses, which is what are going to service, the transport demand on this, buses have to stop frequently. If they are more crowded, they stop for longer periods. When they stop, then traffic piles up behind them. When buses need to pull into a stop, they invariably have to cross a bicycle lane, unless you have the space to put in a completely separate lane and bus stop. And when they're cutting into the bicycle lane, cyclists will be overtaking them from the traffic lane where the cars are also trying to overtake them. So this is a recipe for getting people killed, like the poor young man who was killed on San Jacinto near the University of Texas a few months ago by a number 7 bus. He was cycling on the right, but he was in a traffic lane where the bus was also moving and the cars parked on the edge of the road. So it's dangerous for cyclists, it's difficult for bus drivers, and if your bicycle lanes are marked off, for example, by bollards or these little stick-like piers or whatever, it's even trickier for the bus driver who has to look out for a cyclist coming up on the right, has to look out for someone, and when pulling out, has to look out for whatever is on his left or her left. And if you believe that cars are actually going to stop in order to allow the bus to pull out, then I think you haven't ridden the bus in Austin for some time. Cars, especially if it's crowded, if it's rush hour, they're just piled up one after the other behind the bus, and the bus driver sometimes has to muscle his way into the turning corridor. This happens even on really wide streets like Dean Keaton, where in order to make a left, the 656 bus absolutely has to kind of crush its way by threatening to collide with whatever is on the left. You put these buses on a 2-lane road, you add a higher frequency of bus service, you're going to create a horizontal parking lot, or rather a longitudinal parking lot, which will run from 56th Street to the University of Texas or beyond. And it is not going to be a transit corridor, it's going to be a transit jam. It's like trying to lower your blood pressure by clogging your arteries.
Good evening, Mayor. Thank you for being here. My name is Alan Singletary. 17 years ago, my wife and I bought a tear down on 37th Street, just off Red River, and put everything we had into renovating it, restoring it, and remodeling it, building a home for our family. I'm in the same situation as the gentleman earlier. Every house on our street has gone from SF1 to MS1, SM1, 6 units, whatever, 6 to 10 units. with all the problems that he's already covered. I have literally a stack of questions all printed out, some of which have been addressed, some of which have not, but we're short on time. And after what I've seen, what's the point anyway? So I would like to make one point and then ask a question that I really hope and think that you probably will be able to answer. First, I am sure I'm not the only one in the room who is offended by your repeated implications that we're somehow fooled by fake news on social media and that we can't go read the plans ourselves. When something affects you like this, you read the plan. Now, the question after all of this, you have repeatedly talked about how this is a process and we're going to work with the communities and we just had to put something out there and now we'll figure out what we're really doing. Well, in the 7 or 8 weeks that we have before this goes to the council, what do we do? Where do we go? Because you have a bunch of people here who are going to knock on doors and ring phones and try to make something happen. What can we do?
So I think the staff set up, one, I think there are office hours to be able to go to the staff. You can certainly visit any of the council offices. You can visit my office. I know that the specific plan to let neighborhoods propose alternative plans for the mapping of their areas, there are criteria that's been set or guidelines associated with that. I think the staff is receiving those until like December 1st or something like that. And I don't know if you want to get them to step up and talk about that process. The people in line are shaking their head no. And I don't know whether you consider worth the effort or not, but if you give me those list of questions, I'll get you written answers to them.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Angela Paxia, and I'd like to talk about something that seems to me the big elephant in the room that nobody's talked about yet. I want to first start to ask by, do you think West Campus is the kind of family development that we want to have in our neighborhood? Because I'm asking you this because this kind of blanket plan is what is going to cause our neighborhoods to become. And you have to realize, I live on Carolyn Avenue. Carolyn in Texas, I was actually absolutely shocked when I saw the plan proposal because I live on a beautiful street with homes built in the 20s and 30s. Texas Avenue, same thing. Homes, families. I have kids on both sides of me and in front of me, babies, 2-year-olds, middle school kids. And to think that that's going to be, zoned for 6 to 4 units per lot just seems to be absolutely absurd. So my first thought was, were they even looking at our neighborhood? But then the other thought is, we're right by UT, and we as a neighborhood deal with the influx of stealth dorms every day. Harris Avenue, within a few years, we already have 5 duplexes built, all stuffed with students. And we don't mind students in our neighborhood, but the problem is it's not affordable for families. And I know so many families who would love to come here, but they look at these stealth dorms because there's 4 units, now probably 6 units soon, per condo or per unit. And they're renting for $4,400 with no yard per month. And this is $4,400 per month. Most families cannot afford it. We have friends who shake their head like we don't know how this could ever be affordable and attractive to neighbors or for families. So we're looking at this absurd blanket plan that does not take in consideration where we are in location to the big giant UT. Now, if your plan is to make this area like West Campus, we need to know, because then we can plan accordingly. But right now, this blanket plan to just wipe us off by just giving, and let me just kind of show you the incentives, okay? First of all, I mentioned $4,400 per unit, okay? That's roughly close to $9,000 per month that an investor can get from students. Now you multiply that by, to do 4 units, or 6 units, 10 units, what you're looking at is a green light, a giant green light to investors to come here and put student housing all over our streets, our heritage streets, our homes that are beautifully maintained and loved and built for our families. And that's what this blanket plan, without respect to where we are and who we are as a neighborhood. So I would like for you to address that, please.
So when the council gave direction to staff to come back with a redevelopment of, a rewrite of the land development code, the goal was not to destroy the neighborhood.
But that's what it's already
The goal is to increase the housing supply in the city, and to increase the housing supply in the city in the areas that are closest to transit, the areas of the city primarily that have the grid system that works. Because as we're trying to set citywide goals, and as we have council members from districts across the city, people are trying to avoid the stories that we all see now under the existing code, where we're having houses that are being torn down and McMansions being built. It's the goal, and I.
But you have to realize there's a market distortion based on where we are located. And if you do not factor that in, you are creating a major incentive. That's why a blanket statement does not work. A blanket plan does not work, because there are distortions in this plan. There's distortions in the market because of our proximity. And that's why I ask you, is your plan to make this area like West Campus? Because if it is, you've got the perfect plan in place to make it that way.
Okay.
If it's not, you need to look at market distortions.
So the answer to the question is no. The goal is not to make this area like West West Campus. Sorry, we want a little bit denser than that. No, the goal is not to make it like West Campus is. And I don't, if you give me your contact information, let me ask about the distortion question, because I haven't asked that question in particular. So let me ask that question. I hear what you're saying, but because the goal is not to have it look like West Campus. And the goal as we do density around the city is to do things that are housing scale, that maintain generally the same kind of framework that exists in neighborhoods, but to increase the density and the opportunities in the city. So give me your contact information, and I'll ask that question. I'll follow up that with you.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, my name's Jen Burbis. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Sure, Jen.
I want to start with, I am pro-affordable housing. I give significant volunteer time to an organization that deals with older adults, and one of the reasons I'm involved with that organization is because I feel this is a vulnerable population to housing insecurity. I'm also pro-density, also born in Chicago, lived there as an adult, did not have a car there. Austin's not Chicago. I live in one of the most dense neighborhoods on purpose because I love this neighborhood. I have an economic and investments background, and the reason I tell you this is because I feel that the market impacts aren't being considered with regard to the new land code. I have evaluated many properties using the maps, some in my own portfolio, some just around similar neighborhoods, and realized that there are incentives to tear down affordable housing. I myself have a fourplex in Terrytown that is perfect for a single parent, let's say, that wants a child to go to Cassis. The rents are less than $1,800 a month. I am incentivized with the new code to tear down that building, and because of the low density requirement on Enfield west of Mopac, I can build only 6 units, which would give me 1,400 square feet apiece. The market rates for those units, if I redevelop it at significant profit, I might add, are $750,000 per unit. I don't think that's the density we're going for. I have done this all up and down Enfield Road. The incentives are there to tear down units between 600 and 1,500 square feet and replace them with townhomes in the 700 to 850,000 range. And so what I'm asking you is, do you have market economists? We have 2 in our house that have been working on this for the last couple of days. And again, we have also read the code and created spreadsheets and models that we'd be happy to share. Are there economists looking at this? Because I don't think we're incentivizing what we think we're incentivizing.
The answer to that is Yes, there are economists that are looking at this, but I don't think they're looking at it at that level. So if you send me that information, let me get that to them,
Yes,
and then we'll get you that, and happy to.
Hi, Mayor.
Who's the economists that are working on this? It's Northwest, Eco Northwest is the economist. Go ahead.
Hi, Mayor. Karen McGraw, Hyde Park. I've been standing in a line a while, so you said we could respond to some of the things you say, so I've got a couple of those. One thing is, I think this whole thing is a theory. It's not reality, it's a theory. And those of us who live here, we see the reality. We know what's going to happen. You can write up a theoretical plan all day, but we know if 6 or 10 or 12 people live in a duplex and ride the bus to campus, they all still have cars. So we know that we're still going to have many, many cars. So this whole parking thing is just, it's a theory, you know, that we're going to become Chicago. Also, you referred to saying that this was a staff recommendation, but this is a council directive. And the staff will tell you that. It's from the council directive. None of this, I'm not seeing this as staff recommendation for how to plan a city. So we need to keep remembering it's coming from the council. There are several other things that will happen, but I also want to say the preservation tool, that is the only thing in the code, is a preservation tool, and it is a lie. Because it is not preservation. Preservation is a field of study. Preservation has professionals. Preservation has federal standards. Making something up that requires 2 walls to be standing is not preservation. And so that needs to be completely rethought. That is not preservation. Speaking of which, I want to talk about trust, because I think if the city had come to all of these people who have lived through neighborhood planning and all sorts of things and said, well, you know, we did neighborhood planning, which is an infill program. We demanded infill, you gave it, but we don't trust you anymore. So we're just going to run right over your neighborhoods because we're not working with you. We're doing our thing now. That's where we are. So this is my yes or no question. I'm sorry, this is a little bit long, but the transition zone mapping is overtaking all of the efforts of these neighbors to protect homes, trees, history, and character, including local historic districts paid for by neighborhood associations, National Register districts paid for by neighborhood associations, neighborhood plans following all public participation requirements, 3 NCCDs that were all done by neighbors and with their resources and time, and local historic districts, local historic landmarks, all financed by local residents, okay? Well, the city does not intend to continue neighborhood planning or the tools that people worked hard to select. No more conservation districts, that's out of the code. And it's highly questionable whether local historic districts, landmarks, and National Register districts will be respected. While these are not noted specifically in the council directive, and there's been a lot of confusion and question because the people out here want to know what happens to our historic districts, because it appears you're setting up a loggerheads between what can get through the Landmark Commission when somebody wants to build 10 units behind their contributing bungalow and what the council is going to allow when they get appeals. So I really think you're setting up a real conflict that's going to undermine these districts. So it seems to everybody here, many, many people I've talked to, that getting rid of preservation and conservation and all of these things is intentional by the council. It is not stated, but it is intentional. So my yes or no question is it intentional by the council?
No, and I don't think that it's happening that way. If it is happening that way, then that's something that we need to be talking about. So the council, to be clear, the council did give policy direction very clearly, and I've said that tonight, that we've given the staff direction on the policies we wanted to achieve, And then the staff has come back with a recommendation on the best way to achieve those policy directions that have come from the council. Included in that was preserving the NCCDs. Included in that was to preserve the historic districts, with some adjustments made for the transition zones within the city. So the area outside the NCCD is not, but again, remember that the whole concept of having transition zones and having increased density, enabling corridors to develop with multi-use purposes, both for commercial and for residential uses, was something that the council together as a group decided was in the best interests of the city to have happen. And we have people from all over the city that are driving for different things with different priorities. But yes, that was a very, very deliberate decision that was made, because it was believed that, and I believe that, this city needs to increase the housing supply in the city. We have to do something to better enable transit to work in this city. That there are certain things that have to happen, and we recognize that there are going to be trade-offs as we do that around the city. But to the degree that it's not happening in the best way that it can happen, this is the opportunity for this community and for all communities to come back in and say, we hear that goal, but there are better ways for you to achieve that here.
Well, I hope that you have enough trust in the people here who know this neighborhood, all of these neighborhoods, that the time will be allowed to do the full public planning process that we all did in neighborhood planning, historic districts, everything, that we did the full neighborhood planning program with notifications and meetings and all kinds of things that we did, and that's not happening here. So, thank you.
Hi, Barbara Gibson, Hyde Park. I just want to say, I was also at Phil's memorial service with Susan earlier today, and I want to be kind, and Phil was funny, and I'm not funny. But I want to echo what Karen said about distrust, because citizens of the city have fought for McMansion ordinances, neighborhood conservation districts, historic neighborhood districts, and it has been dismissed. And when Code Next didn't go through because the citizens said, this is not right, there are problems in these areas, instead of taking a vote, you said, well, we aren't in agreement, so we're not going to go forward with a vote. And so now I feel like, I don't know sports, my family would agree with that, I feel like this is an end run to cut off public debate, which happened to a little bit of extent with Code Next across the city, and change the land development code, which has not been stagnant for 30 years. It's changed all the time. You can look online and see that it's changed. And what concerns me about many things, aside from ignoring what the voters have said they wanted, is the rush to go with this plan. And what Imagine Austin also talked about was flood analysis before change, impact on AISD before change, and I haven't heard any of this. I've heard you say tonight environmental groups endorse it. I'm curious what environmental groups endorse this plan, and what are the cities all over the country adopting this kind of plan, because it has a disproportionate impact on District 9, and it guts Hyde Park.
Evening, Mayor. I'm David Garino from Hancock. Can you tell us when we can expect a written notice of any change in the status of our zoning, and what kind of appeal rights will we have under the new code?
I don't know when do the notices go out of the code? What notices go out?
So for Brent Lloyd with the leadership team, and for
For a comprehensive rewrite of a city code and an adoption of a new map, published notice is required, and published notice was provided for the Planning Commission hearing, and it will be provided for the council hearing in advance of I think the December 7th hearing date. Appeal rights are fully embodied in the code in terms of being able to appeal permitting decisions. I think that the ability of citizens to file appeals relative to development approvals is kind of a patchwork in current code, and there's an effort, it's a complicated issue, but there's an effort to make that much more robust and accessible in the new code. So I want to just briefly, since we're running out of time, I believe, I want to just briefly address a couple themes that I've heard mentioned. Residential corridors. We, now that the code is published, the staff team is going to have to work with the policymakers. We can't just produce a new code at this point. But we hear you on the residential corridors issue. The staff team, we have long, intense discussions around all of these issues. And there's some points that have been made with respect to residential corridors that we think are legitimate, that are the ones that maybe we didn't think of when we were putting this together. And so we are considering options with respect to residential corridors and not just Duval. There are many ways I want to point out in which feedback from people in this room and people across the community have informed staff's work. And one of them is council's direction said to make multiple changes to the NCCDs. It also said to preserve the NCCDs. Staff, when we looked at that and we looked at all the NCCDs and how carefully crafted they are, determined that it wasn't possible to do both. So the proposal that staff came forward with respect to changes to the NCCDs was much less than what council had asked for. We also, with respect to single-family homes in the transition areas, we have substantially, in the published version of the code, provided much more rights to existing single-family homes to be rebuilt and preserved than was initially proposed. So I just want to emphasize that although nobody's ever going to be satisfied with everything in the code, we are listening and we're prepared to course correct as this goes through the process. I also want to point out that with respect to flooding, the Watershed Protection Department, who could not be here tonight, where we have open houses and office hours, where October is a very busy month, but they believe emphatically that this code will improve overall flooding risk. And I think there are a couple ways in which that's a couple things I want to emphasize on that. One of them is that for new commercial redevelopment sites, the impervious cover will assume to be 0% for purposes of the flood controls that they're required to provide. So there are a number of technical improvements to the code that the staff believe are going to have a substantial positive impact on flooding. Additionally, the plumbing code, we have a local amendment in the plumbing code now that we've already issued 2 red tags under that is intended to require when new construction drain to the stormwater system or another location. So staff is trying to take a more proactive role, short of requiring every single family home to present fully engineered drainage plans. Staff is trying to find a balanced way to address flooding far more robustly than we have in the past. Tree protections are going to remain the same. There is a greater ability for administrative variances for heritage trees on corridors, but elsewhere the regulations are the same. And additionally, there are provisions that we put into the code that are intended to allow greater enforceability. So there's some improvements, we think, to the tree protections that haven't gotten a lot of attention that we're happy to talk with you about afterwards. So those are, I guess, the comments I have on the high points, but also I want to just emphasize that mapping changes will be considered. And please go to the LDC website, and until December 2nd, which is a Monday at 6 p.m., you all have the opportunity to present suggestions for mapping changes, and there are some criteria that we've suggested that you consider in making those suggestions.
Let's go ahead and take questions from the last 3 that are in line. 2.
Actually, we have 3. Terry is standing, but I have a... Thank you for your time.
Sure.
Hi, Mayor
Go ahead.
Adler. My name's Sarah Bircher. I'm with Hyde Park. I live right around the corner. You can come see my home on the homes tour.
Okay.
You said something earlier that I wanted to ask clarification on. It's a really specific item. You said that you read from some code that said that the homestead value cannot be evaluated at a best use level, that it had to be evaluated as it was being used.
Correct.
Does that speak to the improvement alone?
It's the value of the property, so it would be both land and improvements.
Everything.
That's correct. And one of the bases for, one, this law is pretty straightforward, and it's the law in Texas. But when you take a lot that somebody pays a lot for because they can build 3 units on it as opposed to 1 unit on it, and you have 1 unit on that property, if the land value goes up, the building on that lot has no value. Because in order to be able to realize, in that instance, the opportunity to be able to build three units, you're tearing down that building. So even if this was not in place, if you had the neighboring property, they couldn't take the land value that was somebody paid for in order to be able to build 3 units and then put the value of your improvement on top of that lot. Because in that scenario, that building has no value. No one would pay that much for the lot and also pay value for the building because they're going to be scraping it. So that's one of the basis for this being law. But you don't have to rely on that. You're allowed just to rely on the law itself that says that your homestead value has to be determined solely on the basis of the property's value as a residence homestead, regardless of whether the residential use of the property by the owner is considered to be the highest and best use of the property.
I'm not sure that that's how it works in practice. Our
All I can
land
say is that
values rise together, and our land value is about 66% of the evaluation of our homestead.
Right.
So I do believe that land values are going up based on adjacent uses in reality.
So having read the law and hearing the kinds of things that we were hearing in the community, we called and asked the chief appraiser to come. And if you reach out to my office, I'll give you the link. It's for when she came and testified to the council and to the public. About the practice that she said that her office was utilizing in this instances, and she described this and explained how this worked. If you reach out to my office, if anybody does, I can send you that clip. If you're going down to the appraisal district to make that argument, you should bring that clip with you. We asked her to come and publicly say whether or not that was true.
The only other request I have is that I heard mention of a lot where you could keep a single-family homestead and build 10 additional units. And I'd love to see an elevation of what that looks like. And I think that would help everybody to see what is being envisioned as positive development.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're almost there, don't worry.
It's okay.
I'm David Connor. I live at 3820 Avenue F. It's a historic house that was built by Peter Mansbindle for his daughter and her husband, who was the city manager for 30 years of Austin, so he's probably turning in his grave right now. Anyway, I am zoned now R4H HD. So I'm a state and city landmark. And for this zoning, I get to build 6 units. So my question is to you, can I tear down my house and build 6 units? I'm also the chair of the Hyde Park Development Review Committee for the past 10 years. I see some developers here who probably want to get my property in the neighborhood next to me, because between my house and the house next to me, we're 20,000 square feet of land.
So your question, as you mentioned, you have, did you say R4?
I'm R4HHD.
R4HD, okay. So you still have the H applications on your property.
Mm-hmm.
Those don't change at all. Those processes are still the same.
Yeah, I apply every year.
Okay, so assuming that you cleared the bar on those processes the way you would have to today if you wanted to change a property, then you could
Demolish?
redevelop.
Okay, so the answer is yes, I can demolish my house, even though it's a historic structure. Yeah, I wouldn't apply, I just wouldn't apply. And the city council will probably approve the demolition, even though Terry Myers will probably have a fit. Thank you. Also, the city staff city staff told me the same answer.
So the answer to the question is, the existing law does not change in that instance.
Yes, so I can demolish the house.
Whatever existing law is doesn't change in
Because
this
city
instance.
council will now turn over my.
I mean, you can, under the same rules, to the same extent, with the same limitations that exist today.
And
That's not changed.
Which is what? City staff told me Tuesday night at Kathy's district that these zonings will incentivize demolition by neglect and demolitions of houses. And she said, yes, I could demolish the house if I stop with the age zoning.
I think the same rule applies today, under the existing code as applies under the existing code. What? What?
One more question. Please respect those who are asking and those who are responding as we have this whole time. Y'all are doing great. We're almost there.
So I can build 6 units, correct?
If you clear all the approvals that you would have to do today,
right,
then you could.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Short person. Hi, I'm Terry Myers. I'm a professional preservation planner. I started my career 34 years ago as a planner for the city of Raleigh, North Carolina. And I'm a consultant. I've worked in cities all over the country that would kill to have viable central city neighborhoods like ours. And they lost theirs in the past due to ill-conceived urban renewal, or as we in the business call it, urban removal techniques that gutted their central cities and left many of them blighted. And what I'm hearing from other cities, and I've worked for the city of Dallas, I've worked for Houston, which for some reason has no zoning but actually has historic districts that they maintain. I work for little cities. Rio Grande City has designated its entire city historic. I've worked as a consultant to Hyde Park for the local historic district and did the first historic district in Austin and the Aldridge Place district. And I have real concerns when I hear this, the preservation bonus kind of bandied about. It reminds me of the acronym FAN, Friends of Austin Neighborhoods. It's kind of a reach around. It's a preservation bonus, kind of like what we have now, which is a remodel. I had a remodel of a duplex on my street. It was actual affordable housing on both sides of the duplex. And it's 705 Harris Avenue, in case anybody wants to see it. And they said they were retaining 2 facades. I don't know which they were because they took it down to the studs. But what ended up is a 3-story house that's being sold. It's on the market right now for $1.2 million, and it was supposedly a remodel. And that's what I see in the preservation bonus. And I have unfortunately read the land development code. And what I see is this term, preservation bonus, it is kind of a misnomer for people to say, yeah, we're preserving things, but it's like 2 facades. And then they can build, higher and bigger and what some people call best. And I would like, my question to you is, would you please look into that and see how it will really work in the real world in a situation like David Connor just said, he's gonna tear down his historic landmark. How will this Hyde Park is a National Register district and a local historic district. Some of us are looking into local historic districts for our neighborhoods because we want to protect and preserve the quality of life that we have there in these historic buildings. And I'd just like to say, I kind of shouted this out earlier, I must not be a very good professional preservation planner because I live under the poverty level. I rent 2 rooms in my house out to UT students. I have a garage apartment I rent to UT students, none for more than $650 a month. Apparently, I'm not a very good landlord either. And my block is already, we have students, we have ADUs, we have all of this stuff. I live 3 houses from Red River. And if one house goes the way it's intended in the land development code, there goes the neighborhood. And it really is a domino effect. I see this happen over and over. I see it in other cities that I work for. And I want to ask you, please, to look into this and see if this preservation bonus is actually the thing that you might think it is, or that others on the council might think it is, but in fact is not.
Absolutely, we'll take a look at it, and it's real clear that that was not the intent of the council, for someone to be able to get a preservation bonus, to be able to take the house you're trying to preserve and effectively tear it down and go 3 stories high. And so I will check to see if that's happening, because if that did, that's not what we asked for.
That's how it's operating now with this remodel thing, and your planning staff knows this. So,
I'll ask about that. If you give me your contact information, I'll give you the answer that I get on that.
thank you.
Yes.
You have time for one more?
One more.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll try not to make this personal. I live in Hancock.
Thank you.
I live in a 1,400 square foot house, a little bit over 6,000 square foot lot, and I am zoned RM1. I have a 5-year-old and I have a 6-year-old, and we walk to school every day. And I went to the Kathy Tovo Town Hall, and I was stunned when safety wasn't a criteria in the 5 criteria elements. I'm also stunned. I was stunned by the head planner, who I thought was very good at explaining the process that city staff, the arduous process that city staff went through, as directed by council. She was very good, and I apologize, I don't remember her name. Anique. And Anique, when she started talking and describing RM1, she kept saying, well, you could put 6 houses or 6 units on your lot if you're zoned RM1. Or you could, if you have a affordability bonus, or you could go up to 10 units. And at the time, I thought, well, that's just a figure of speech. You could. And I went home and I talked to my husband, and we both own our own businesses, and we worked really hard to buy into the neighborhood. And our plan was always 15-year note, let's pay off the house, have an ADU in the back, provide some affordable housing, and help defray our property taxes. And I said, I wonder who the you they're talking about is. Can we go to the bank, and can we amass enough capital as individuals to redevelop our lot to benefit the full development and highest and best use? Who is this you that can do it? That you isn't me. That you isn't my neighbor.
He's the president.
And so I would ask you, especially in a neighborhood where many of these neighborhoods represented, where there is a very high percentage of landowners that are not stakeholders in terms of they are not physically present in the neighborhood. They live elsewhere. Hancock, I think, is close to 50% of actual land ownership. People don't live in the neighborhood and don't contribute to the quality of life in the neighborhood. So are they the you? Are developers the you? Who is the you in the you can redevelop your lot, your single family house with the potential for an ADU, to 6 units or 10 units on a tiny little street with tiny little lots that dead ends into Waller Creek? It's not even connected all the way through. So who is the you?
I think you point out something else. I mean, obviously, the you is whoever owns the property.
Well, I can't do that. I'm not that you.
And a lot of people who do it may choose not to do it as well.
Right.
And that was an or, that wasn't her. Some people will be able to do it. Some people will choose to do it. The entitlement runs with the land. So the you, I mean, you're asking a rhetorical question, yes. and it's a really kind of hard question to be able to answer. But it does point out, I think, that the changes that this code makes are not things that would happen overnight under any scenario. But again, you know, I appreciate how everybody in this room loves their neighborhood. And I know that to be true. I mean, this is a wonderful neighborhood. I used to live in this neighborhood. People all over this city love the neighborhoods that they're in as well. And I think as you go around this city, you'll find people all over this city that love this city and are trying to do what they think is best for this city. Obviously, with respect to a land development code, there's a real considerable difference of opinion as to what should happen in any particular place in the city. And the council that has representatives from all over the city and the different districts are really trying their best to try and reach and address the concerns and the priorities that we're hearing from all over the city. I really appreciate the opportunity to hear tonight. I'm going to respond to the people that I said that I would. I heard questions that I'll follow up and ask as well. I would urge everybody to stay part of this process and to participate in this process, because that opportunity exists for everybody that's here. And my hope is that at the end of this process, we're going to have a code that best positions our city to move forward. I appreciate you all being here tonight.
I'd like to once again thank all of you for coming and for listening carefully and taking notes. Thank you to the mayor. Thank you to Councilmember Tovo. Thank you to the staff. The questions that you have, you can give them to me. You can give them to Betsy. We'll be up here taking those. We'll submit them and compile them. Thank you again.